to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV or on social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories and listen to real people and what they think, what they do, what they go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. So today we've got something a little bit different. We have Mike Dyer, who is a family law solicitor. And he's going to talk to us about, the first steps when the relationship breaks down and people are wondering, should I get divorced, should I not? I'm not sure. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, hi, Sophie, and hi, everyone.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners on this. It's a subject that's really close to my heart.
And it's a very wide subject too, isn't it?
It's huge, and we probably won't be able to cover all the things that I may like to talk about.
Yeah, we have to do another one. That's okay.
So perhaps a little bit about me. I'm a specialist divorce lawyer and solicitor in the UK, and I've been doing this for about 34 years. I'm also an accredited specialist with Resolution, which is our specialist family law association, which adopts a non-confrontational approach to matrimonial affairs. And also a collaboratively trained lawyer and a family mediator. So what we try and do
more about what each of these things are so that people can understand.
Oh, sure. My day-to-day practice, I see clients that have relationship breakdowns and they could be married or they could be simply cohabitees. And there are essentially four options when people come to see me as to how they can deal with the process. I could probably come to that a little bit later, but essentially when people try to, or they decide they need to separate, what they need to do is consider how they're going to do that and the process by which they can do it. And a lot of it comes down to the financial side of things. Even if there are children, which is the most important thing in any breakdown, they have to decide firstly whether they can talk to each other and try to resolve issues in relation to children and the finances between themselves, which is obviously the most cost-effective way of dealing with it. But that's quite difficult for most people because communication completely disappears when relationships break down. And so they often can't deal with that on that basis. Or there are power imbalances, either from the man or the woman's side, and they don't feel that they can negotiate on an equal footing. So often that doesn't work, but for some couples it does. The second option potentially is that we can simply go through a solicitor mediation route, solicitor negotiation route, where each client has a solicitor. We obtain all the financial disclosure that we require, and then we send letters backwards and forwards to each other. Sometimes we have roundtable meetings and sometimes we don't. The other option, of course, which is a slightly cheaper option, would be to attend mediation. And mediation isn't compulsory in the UK, but it works very well for couples who sometimes are able to sit in the same room with an independent third party, the mediator, who can help assist in the negotiation process, manage power imbalances, and try and help people resolve issues in relation to the children, who the children should live with, and what form of time spent with each parent there should be. But also can look at the financial options. Some people don't think about the various options that may be available to them, whether the house should be sold, whether it should be transferred, and so forth. And the mediator, usually a solicitor mediator, but not always, has the experience to try and help those parties come to their own decisions in a safe environment. Sometimes you have shuttle mediation if there is a potential issue and somebody doesn't feel they can sit in the same room. But essentially, it's a really good, helpful process for the right people. There are two drawbacks, and certainly one of them is that it is not legally binding. So you could spend several sessions in a mediation with your mediator, agree a memorandum of understanding, and then technically sign it, walk out of the door and tear it up. So that's a bit of a problem. And also, of course,
how would you enforce that then? Let's just say, me and someone have signed this thing and then I walk out and I rip it because I'm not happy with it after all. How do you solve that problem?
Well, I think as a mediator, all you've got to try and do is get them back into the room to ask why they've decided they don't want to go along with it. Sometimes the problem is that people don't run mediation in parallel with taking legal advice.
Okay.
So they may feel pressured in a mediation environment to agree something, and then they take it to their lawyer. And the lawyer says, well, I wouldn't actually do this if I were you, or I think you could get a better deal if we took this particular tack. And so from a lawyer's perspective, we would look at that, make sure that we have the proper disclosure, because lawyers tend to like the documents to support what people say.
Yeah.
And we would look at that. And if the memorandum works, then that's fine. Then you would go to the lawyer, and the lawyer would put that into usually a thing called a consent order, submit that to the judge, and hopefully the court would agree it. Sometimes you might have several sessions of mediation, and if it fails, that's just unfortunate, but there's not much we can do about that. You would have wasted your money, and if you're not careful, your potential positions would have become polarized. And you know that there's a real insurmountable problem.
Talking of consent orders, just, this is just a question because it's someone I know. I had an ex-partner who got divorced, and he got a consent order because he just wanted out.
Yeah.
And in there, it stated that he would, because there was a prenup involved, he would give her £400 a month until she was either 65 or remarried. Can these things actually be revisited like 10, 15 years down the line, or how?
Oh, I think a consent order, particularly dealing with, I think that in that case, you talk about maintenance for an ex-wife.
Without kids?
Well, children is slightly different, but if we stick with maintenance for, say, wife at the moment, if that £400 was for the wife, then maintenance is always subject to variation by the court.
Okay.
So if circumstances change, if she became impecunious, needed more money, she could always seek to perhaps capitalise that over that period of time between now and the age of 65, if the ex-husband's assets were sufficient, or if he'd become exceedingly wealthy and all her circumstances, I say, changed for the worse, and she might require more. But they could always go up or down, subject to an application to the court.
It depends on the circumstances.
It always depends on the circumstances. But
okay.
Maintenance orders are definitely capable of variation. Child maintenance is different because in the UK, that's generally dealt with in most cases by the Child Maintenance Service, subject to an application. The court has no jurisdiction unless there are specific reasons, or the husband has a sufficient income that you would require a top-up.
Okay. And okay. So people are normally a bit scared to go and see someone about a divorce for the first time because sometimes things might not be working out, but they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what the options are. Maybe we'll get better. And I think one of the reasons why we're so scared about going to see someone is because in their eyes it makes it very final, where actually it's not really the case. Could you explain a little bit more about the process to reassure them?
I think certainly from my perspective, whenever I see a new client, we always want to make sure that the client's in the right place to make that decision as to whether to end the relationship. And each client is different. You might see a client who is determined to end the relationship, has been through the process, has rationalized it and decided they want the relationship to end. Or we have clients who are on the receiving end of somebody who said, actually, I think this isn't working. I want a divorce. And they come from completely different ends of the spectrum. Or you may have somebody who just is not particularly happy, but is not sure. So certainly my philosophy has always been talk through the circumstances as to why they're here, because it's a big step for anyone to come through a solicitor's door. It's a really, really big step because they're worried about the costs and so forth. So the first thing I do is work out what their circumstances are and ask them whether they really think there's a possibility of a reconciliation. Because my view is that you should try to save a marriage, a savable marriage or relationship, if at all possible, particularly where there are children. Obviously, if there's domestic abuse issues and the children are suffering, then no, we don't do that. But we could then I could refer them to perhaps relate or counselling and then send them away to have a think about it. And then they can come back if they really feel that there is no hope. Some people come in and they're adamant that, husband or wife is such and such a person, they want to divorce and they just want to go for it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you start talking about the options that we discussed earlier as to how they can go through that process. And they're the different options for the divorce. And the divorce is, in this day and age, is based on 1973 Matrimonial Causes Act. So it's still a fault-based divorce. And as we know, there's been a lot in the media about no-fault divorces for Mr. and Mrs. Owens, and Mrs. Owens couldn't get divorced. But it's still fault-based at the moment, and there is only one ground for divorce, and that's your marriage is irretrievably broken down. And we still have to evidence that by adultery, sexual intercourse between a married person and another person, unreasonable behaviour, which is a variety of aspects of behaviour, and intolerability, 2 years separation with consent, 2 years desertion, and 5 years separation. And I think the government are now looking to listen to people as a result of the Owens case and as a result of the work that Resolution have put in.
Do you want to say a bit more about the Owens case? I know what it is, but I'm not sure everybody who's listening will know.
Sorry?
The Owens case. I know what it's about, but I'm not sure everybody will, so...
Well, broadly speaking, Mr. and Mrs. Owens had been married for a number of years, and Mrs. Owens decided that she wanted to divorce Mr. Owens on the basis of his unreasonable behaviour. Mrs. Owens had formed a relationship some years previously with somebody else, and I'm not sure whether that relationship was ongoing, but she had an affair. She then produced a divorce petition based on unreasonable behaviour, and Mr. Owens thought that he had behaved perfectly reasonably, and he defended the divorce. And I have to say, in my 34 years of dealing with divorces, I've had one defended divorce that even that was compromised after a period of time, because it's very difficult. If someone doesn't want to live with you, you really have to accept that fact at the end of the day and allow things to go through and not spend a fortune on it. Well, anyway, Mr. Owens decided to defend it, and the judge asked him to produce his barristers to produce just half a dozen of his most serious allegations of behaviour. As a result of that, they both gave evidence, and the judge found that her allegations of behaviour were simply not substantive enough after a considerable length of marriage to merit the divorce. She hadn't managed to reach that threshold of unreasonable behaviour. And so at the end of the day, applying the law strictly as it is, she wasn't entitled to her divorce. And that's prompted the government to look into, again, no-fault divorces. And hopefully within, I don't think a reasonably short period of time, that will happen. But that will still be based probably on a period of separation of perhaps between 9 and 12 months, something like that, once you've registered your wish to get a divorce. Because most people were simply, I suppose the strongest word is fabricating or exaggerating some of the aspects of behaviour. And the other party would simply accept those, but deny them, not accept them in terms of the legal documentation, but accept that the divorce should go through because the marriage was at an end. A bit of a legal fiction, really, which is a bit dishonest.
And what would be unreasonable behaviour?
Oh, anything from showing no love and affection to extreme violence, working too hard, not working enough, all sorts of things, refusal to engage in intimate relations, a whole variety, depending on the nature of their particular relationship. So something that might be unreasonable in one relationship wouldn't necessarily be unreasonable in another. If people behave badly towards each other habitually, that wouldn't be unreasonable.
Fair enough.
Each case depends on its facts, but most people allow divorces to go through an unreasonable behaviour, but not admitting to that behaviour.
So someone is coming to see you because they're not happy. They then obviously have to decide, as you said, about mediation or whether they're going like full guns blazing and then what's the process, as it were?
It's a fairly straightforward process, to be honest with you, but I liken a divorce to a piece of string with 3 strands to it, particularly if there are children. So we have what we call the decree proceedings, which is the process of issuing the divorce petition, serving it on the other side, getting them to acknowledge receipt of it, thereafter applying for your decree nisi halfway house of divorce, and thereafter applying for decree absolute. And that takes anywhere between, I would say, 4 to 9 months, possibly 6 to 12 months, depending on how quickly the courts and people want to deal with it. The second strand, which sort of can only start really once you've issued the divorce proceedings, unless there are issues of interim maintenance, is the property and financial side of things. Because a lot of these cases come down to money at the end of the day. We call it financial remedy. So we're talking there about maintenance, perhaps, We're talking about the possibility of obtaining a lump sum to go buy another house, a transfer of property from one person to the other. We have to look at pension issues and so on. So the process of the divorce is straightforward. We decide which fact we're going to rely on, adultery, unreasonable behaviour, or separation, and so forth, and we issue the divorce petition. We usually send it to the other side just so they can have a look at it, because what we don't want is to get things off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to necessarily be a pleasant process, but as members of Resolution, we really try to get everybody on board. And if this marriage is failing and it can't be saved, how are we going to sort it out quickly and as amicably as possible? And more importantly, I think, as cost effectively as possible, because if there are children, what most lawyers want to do these days is ensure that there is some kind of a relationship between the parties and the children.
Yeah.
Because the children are the most important part of any divorce and separation. And the third strand would potentially be issues in relation to children. How often does we'll call it the absent parent, it seems to be often the father these days, see the children? And that could be agreed between the parties, or in the absence of agreement, we have to go and see a mediator to see if that could be resolved. And if not, then court proceedings have to be issued. So potentially, you could have 3 sets of proceedings continuing at the same time. And again, that gets very expensive. That's why we try to look for these other alternative methods. So we have the DIY, we have the solicitor negotiation, we have mediation. I didn't touch on the collaborative approach, which is quite popular these days, which is where the lawyers sit around a table with their clients at round table 4-way meetings to try and negotiate a settlement. And they sign an agreement, a participation agreement, to say that they will not go to court. And if they do go to court, they each have to instruct new lawyers.
Right.
And that is quite a popular way of dealing with things now. But it's you've got to vet your clients appropriately. They've got to want to be able to sit in the same room and really just resolve those issues.
Yeah.
It is difficult because you're around a table and lawyers are giving advice to their respective clients around that table. But you can choose your own time frame, and it can often be a lot quicker.
What about, I mean, not that I've really experienced it at all, but I'm pretty sure someone I know did a DIY divorce online. Is that something that can be done? Is it how does that work?
I think the court are, at the moment, the government are trialling a divorce online process so that nobody actually has to attend court anyway, generally, on the divorce itself. Everything is a paperwork exercise. There are 2 courts that are trialling that, so that all the documents are filed electronically. Yeah. And I guess then the public will have access to that. The online divorces that I'm familiar with at the moment are those run by organisations or solicitors' firms. They're not really online because you still have to answer a lot of questions. The lawyers still do the work, but it might be cheaper. I'm not a great fan of online divorces. I think there is so much out there on the websites, the media about divorces, and so much about the law, the case law. The problem is that you need somebody who's experienced and a lawyer, in my view, to guide you through all of that.
I was just about to say, because the thing is, it's one thing just filling in a form online. You know, if you, inverted brackets, don't know what you're doing, how do you know that, you're getting the best deal? Even, I was going to say for both parties, but even just for yourself, sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think that's right. I think that's definitely right. And it may be a case that you don't want to apply for your decree nisi to be made absolute at a certain stage because of financial proceedings haven't been concluded, or you might lose pension rights and so forth. So I think you always need to know the implications of what you're doing, particularly when it comes to financial and property matters. And so even if you don't see a solicitor on a regular basis, you do need just to get an idea of the framework in which you're operating and what your rights and obligations are and the pitfalls of that. Because otherwise you can come significantly unstuck and it could cost you a lot of money. And I think part of the fear of people going to lawyers is that they cost lots of money. And they can do. I mean, the collaborative process is not cheap. It's quick, you're in control, but it's not cheap. But if you, I don't know whether you want me to talk about vague costs, but your average, your average or your ordinary case, if I can put it like that, not super rich and not and not people without very much money. But your average case of parties working with a couple of children, the collaborative process will probably cost between £6,000 and £10,000 in total.
Yeah.
Which isn't bad. It sounds like it's a lot of money, but if you have sort of bigger money cases, you can be talking £20,000 or £30,000 again for the collaborative case. But a court going any case that goes through the various processes up to a final hearing, taking between 9 and 12 months, parties will be spending £20,000, £30,000 each very easily, and not many people can afford that. And it's not a very sensible way to try and conduct your affairs. I mean, clearly, if people don't agree and people are trying to hide money or behave inappropriately and violently, then we have to go off on other tangents and be quite forceful about things. And most lawyers are capable of doing that.
And is there a straightforward way? Just say, there are no kids involved and, they both want to separate. They don't want to be with each other anymore. Is there a cheap, quite straightforward, like, we don't want to be together. She's not doing this. He's not doing that. There is no kids. Is there a straightforward, easy way? Cheap and cheerful, as it were?
Well, that depends on both parties again, doesn't it? I mean, what often happens is, I mean, if you have a situation like that, what we often find is that they say, well, can my wife or husband come and see you as well? Sadly, no.
Okay. It's got to be two separate.
There's an inherent conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
So you have to send one away to go and seek other legal advice. But what you can do is look at from a lawyer's perspective, as I say, we like to see all the documents and we like to dot the I's and cross the T's. But if the clients come to us with an agreement and you have a look at the finances, now our job is not to tell clients what to do. Our job is really just to say, look, okay, this is what you want to do. These are your financial options, and perhaps you could do better or you could do worse. But that all has a cost. So we can say, that's fine. We can then deal with the divorce, but we've still got to jump through the legal hoops. We've still got to issue the divorce petition, pick our grounds, our facts for the divorce. That still takes time and has a cost. And then we would be able to draw up the consent order, hopefully, which reflects what they want to do. Sometimes if we don't have all the documentation, we might have to draft up an appropriate letter which sort of absolves us in many ways of responsibility because we haven't seen all of that disclosure. And there might be something in the woodwork. Somebody might be hiding assets. Yeah. There might be reasons of which we're unaware as to why they want to do this deal. And so it's a sad state of affairs, but sometimes we really have to look over our shoulders to make sure that what we are doing is 100% correct, because sometimes people come and say, I want to do this, I'm fed up with this, I want out, I'm prepared to do this. And then 12 months down the line, once they've done it, they suddenly realize that actually they've made a mistake. They're not as financially secure as they might like to be. But it's often too late then, particularly if they've agreed something by consent. So I'm a great one for explaining the options to the clients, seeing if they really want that divorce, and then trying to resolve it as sensibly, as quickly, and as amicably as possible. And I think a lot of lawyers take that same view, because it's a difficult enough experience separating and trying to find a new life, because all these things tend to happen at once.
And then there's the emotional side of things as well that people sometimes forget. Well,
I think that's right. And I think certainly these days with the collaborative approach, and even within mediation, we can also refer to other professionals with better skills than we have. So we can refer to family therapists, to counsellors, to independent financial advisors who can talk about pensions and so forth. And so that's a lot easier than it used to be, because we get everybody literally to collaborate and assist in finding the best solution for those couples as we possibly can, so they are both as financially independent as possible and emerge from this whole process as unscathed as they possibly can, because it's a very, very difficult and emotional experience. And we also find, of course, that all these stressful experiences happen at once or within a period of time. So the relationship ends, which is stressful in itself. Often the house has to be sold, and so you have to go and buy new houses each. And then when that's happened, often you have to talk about wills, just in case something should happen to one or other of you in the process. And it's amazing how often all of those three things, plus you might have a relative die within that process as well. And so so we're here to try to make sure that we cover all those bases, and ensure that the clients get through it with as little cost and as little stress as possible.
And do you think that sometimes people enter marriage too lightly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably right. And they buy houses together without thinking about it too much and the implications of that. It's a strange one, but nobody really understands what the legal obligations are when you're entering into a marriage relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a massive commitment, not just emotionally, but also practically and financially. And you are entering into this legal framework. And the same with the civil partnerships. Which is great. And I think they do, but nobody gives you lessons as to
how to do that,
why you should get married and how you should conduct yourself and what happens if. It's a shame, but it doesn't happen. The same as I said with people who decide to cohabit. There's no such thing as the common law wife. People, you sort of think, after 10, 12 years, I'm a common law wife. No, you aren't. You have no rights whatsoever.
And I think this is the thing, a lot of people rely on myths or stuff that was said, so it must be true sort of thing.
Yeah, it's not true. We face it all the time. And it's rather like the other myth where the wife who's not contributed to the mortgage or hasn't worked out the marriage is convinced that she doesn't have an interest in the property, or the husband who says, well, I paid the mortgage and I earned the money, thinks that he has an interest in it. Well, no. Actually, it doesn't matter, because those contributions to the marriage are not just financial, but they're in raising children or doing all the household work or supporting the husband's business. But with cohabitees, it's generally the problem there is that people don't think about how they own a property. If they put money in, mum and dad may have lent some money, given some money to them. What happens if that relationship breaks down? How do they resolve who gets what out of that property? And they don't think about how they can do that, which they can do by a deed of trust. And the rights in relation to children are different as well, and property. And there's no maintenance, no pension provision for cohabiting couples. People need this explained to them, I think, right at the beginning.
And do you think that people should remain married even when the relationship is not working anymore, not going anywhere?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you have to look and see if there are children. If the children are adversely affected by the tension and the stress within their relationship, I'm not sure that's a good idea. And that they should seriously think about separating, because the children might be happier.
Yeah.
And I think most people think about themselves rather than the children in those circumstances. And I think the feeling today is...
Or they think that they're helping the children by staying together.
Well, I think stability for the children.
But if there's arguments every night, it's not good for the kids, is it?
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. And I think they might be best out of that situation. But it's true. I think children of stable marriages, generally, my understanding is from the research that's been carried out, if people are married, they tend to stay together longer than cohabiting couples, and children seem to do better if the parents stay together. But if they're arguing all the time or there's domestic violence, it can't be very pleasant.
No.
And I think there are a lot of children who are surviving but being damaged by relationships that do stay together for the wrong reasons.
No, I agree. And finally, what advice would you give someone who's just not very sure about what to do next?
Well, I think they have to think very carefully about what they want for the future. Are they happy? If they're not happy and they can't see any happiness at the end of the day, they should I think they should always think about attending some form of either personal counselling, relationship counselling individually to say how they feel. Yeah, and you're the perfect person to do that, Sophie. Or they should go and see Relate or some other organisation so they can work out what their true feelings are and where they want to go in the future. And if the future isn't with that person and it's making them desperately unhappy and that's affecting the rest of their life, there's not much point in that.
And the thing is, sometimes it can be sorted. It's just miscommunication. And sometimes they've left it too long and they're too far down the garden path, as it were.
It's an interesting one. Most people in relatively unhappy situations will stay together because of the children.
Yeah.
I've seen somebody today who's been married for 35 years and the children are in their 30s. And they've suddenly decided, you know what, I can't do this anymore. And they've decided to get divorced. I've had people I saw last week, who've been married for 2 years. And they've decided to get divorced. But I think a lot of people with children, particularly of a certain generation, tend to stay together for the sake of the children and put up with it. But younger people don't. Younger people, I think, see the future and they don't like what they see. And so they want to change it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, Mike, thank you.
You're most welcome.
It's been lovely talking to you, and I'm sure that we can have you on again and talk some more.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you. So if you've enjoyed the show, then please subscribe and leave us a review. But more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.
Yeah. You're most welcome, Sophie. And thanks again. Thanks. Cheers. Bye.